Welcome, everybody. Today I have Evie Yoder Miller with us, the author of several books. Her newest ones are part of a trilogy, Scruples on the Line. The first book is Shadows, and then book two, Loyalties, is also just out. So we're super excited to have you, Evie. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Why don't you tell us a bit about the story and the world that you've created for this trilogy, Scruples on the Line?
Okay, well, Scruples on the Line is a historical fiction trilogy. And so that strange combination of history and imagination is at work in this series. So obviously the story has already happened. It's not that I had to invent who was going to fight whom, but rather the way I make my book different about the Civil War, heavens knows we don't need another one, but the way I make mine different is by focusing on civilians and specifically on Anabaptists who were either living in the way of armies coming through, like in the Shenandoah Valley, or if they were elsewhere, like in Chicago, I developed a young man who is affected by all of the drafts and all of the uncertainty, and what is he going to do? So in a sense, the story was given to me. I had to research it and dig it out and let my mind go to work on how these people talked, how they might have felt about these events taking place.
What inspired to write this series?
Well, my first book was historical fiction also. That's called Eyes at the Window. And that story ended in 1861. And it occurred to me, 1861 is when the Civil War started. And I didn't want to use the same characters again. I didn't want to use the same locations. I wanted to push myself to find new spots and new characters to put out in this world. So in some ways, it was kind of a natural movement, but in other ways, it was the book by Stephen Nolt, who used to teach at Goshen College. Stephen Nolt and James Lehman, I think the book is called Mennonites and Amish in the American Civil War. It's nonfiction. And so I got a sense of all of the conflict that happened for Anabaptists during the Civil War. And I guess you could say that inspired me. Well, why not try making it fictionalized? So that's sort of where this began.
Nice. So you talk about Steve Nolt's nonfiction book, Mennonites and Amish in Civil War. What other research did you have to do in order to write these stories?
Yes, it did involve a lot of research. As you can imagine, in my childhood, I basically thought the Civil War happened in the East. It happened at Gettysburg. I knew that Abraham Lincoln was viewed as a hero, and I had a lot to learn about the actuality of the Civil War. So historical libraries were especially important, both on the Goshen College campus and at Eastern Mennonite University. So I spent time there multiple times. And there's also, well, the Mennonite Church Archives used to be on the Goshen College campus. So I spent time there because that's where I found diaries which were very important to me in developing one of the characters. So those were the main historical, factual resources, but I had to do a lot of internet research about things like what are knapsacks, what is meant by pilots, who are the scouts, all of these terms that are used commonly in Civil War conversation and books, they were new to me in that context.
So your first book, Shadows, has about 5 narrators that sort of give us the story. Can you tell us a little about each one and how you created them?
Sure. And by the way, these 5 narrators continue throughout the 3 books. So I'm giving something away there. But anyway, 2 of the narrators live in the Shenandoah Valley because that was an area where General Sheridan came up through with his armies in 1864, fall of 1864. And so there were Mennonites and German Baptists. Both of those are Anabaptist groups. They were living in the Shenandoah Valley. And there's a raft of stories about what happened to civilians in that area. So I chose to create a female in her 40s with a husband and just happens to have 4 sons and 1 daughter when the story starts. And then I created a 50-year-old male in the German Baptist tradition who also had 2 sons who had to flee. And he preferred to be a farmer than to be a minister, as he had been chosen to be in the German Baptist Church. So those 2 characters are completely made up, but they're a composite of what I know happened to people in those traditions in the Shenandoah Valley. Then I created a little girl who is 6 when the story begins in 1859. And she lives in, well, it would be West Virginia today, but at the time it was Western Virginia. It was before statehood for West Virginia. She lives with an Amish family. She has a stepmother. And what I wanted to do with her was to figure out how to have a child learn about the Civil War by overhearing things, by hearing the preacher, seeing fear and concern, and by having travelers who often came by on the route past their place. If you've been in West Virginia, it's Route 50 today. So she is based on an Amish actual family, but I didn't know anything about that particular girl, obviously. And then I have 2 characters who are actual historical figures. One is the young man in Chicago. His last name is Funk, which will ring a bell with some people in your area. And he came from Eastern Pennsylvania. He came to Chicago to work with his brother-in-law in the lumber business. He has a lot of choices to make, a lot of decisions to make. And as the story goes along, he's much more important in book 2 than he is in book 1, but he is critical to the story. He's a Mennonite. I don't know if I said that or not. And then there's an Amish bishop in Iowa, and he's obviously in a frontier situation, and his I would say his big deal is to keep people from getting involved in politics, to avoid muddying yourself with whatever is going to happen with this war talk. So that's kind of the range. He's older, and we have a young man, 2 middle-aged people, and a little girl.
Awesome.
Yeah.
What was the hardest or most challenging part of creating these stories?
Well, I think particularly with the actual historical characters, this push and pull, it has to be authentic to their actual lives, what I know of it and can find out about it. But it also has to take from that what they might have said or how they might have reacted when someone stepped over the line. So negotiating that push and pull was complicated. Figuring out how to create a child narrator was a challenge for me also. Just, I didn't want to have her overhearing things all the time. She had to have her own personality and bring her own limited understanding to what she was hearing. So I'd say those were the 3 most challenging characters. The 2 in the Shenandoah Valley were easier. There was so much that I could have done with them. Yeah.
What was some of the most exciting or fun parts of creating these stories?
Well, I think using my imagination was the fun part, to get beyond what they were thinking inside to creating scenes and having, say, the man in the Shenandoah Valley talking with his neighbor who was a trapper and who supported the Southern effort. That was, well, I guess fun sounds like a strange word, but yeah, it was to create that and imagine that. So yeah, getting rid of, my tendency is to be a slow starter. And I had to start in 1859 instead of in 1857, which is where I wanted to start. I had to figure out what I could get rid of, that it would kind of work its way in later.
Sure. So that actually leads me to my next question, lovely. And what did you have to edit out of this book in order to make it the best it could be?
Yeah, exactly. I've already said that. I had to edit out some of the background, and I had to edit out some of the internalization and let the reader see it with dialogue, with the way we talk with each other, half sentences and unfinished thoughts and dismay, and let the reader figure out what's going on in the narrator's head rather than saying she was really upset. So yeah, that's what I had to edit a lot.
Sure. Why don't you let us know a little bit about your writing process? Do you sit down and write for chunks of time, or are you sort of when the inspiration hits you, you will write and then you'll do something else? What does that look like for you?
Yeah. Well, I'm fortunate that by living alone, I can have some unpredictable writing schedules, and I'm retired from teaching, so I don't have to worry about other responsibilities. So I do try to start by 9 in the morning and work for 3 or 4 hours if that's going well. If it's not, then stop and do something else outside. But yes, my mornings are the best writing time. Afternoon is good for looking it over, thinking about what I need to change in that section, thinking about what's ahead, going back and making some changes. So I try to write almost every day when I'm really in the process of writing. But yeah. Mm-hmm.
And about how long did it take you to write Shadows? Like, give us a sense of like.
Well, to write the whole 3-book trilogy.
I was thinking just book 1. What did that look like?
Yeah, well, it's hard to separate it. Sure. Because the whole process, I would say, has taken me 12 years.
Wow.
From when I started doing research. And so to work on, say, the first 20 chapters, maybe half a year to get a draft of it. Mm-hmm. If I could get 3 to 5 chapters work done in a week, that was really a good week. But then, I write a whole draft, then I come back and revise the whole draft, because then I know what the ending is, and that's going to affect where I want to begin.
Sure.
So I'm not giving you a very good answer about.
No, it's good. It gives me an insight into how you're doing that.
Yeah.
While we're on the subject of writing, when you hit a block or writing's not going well, what are some things you do?
Well, that's when it's good to go out and mow the grass or dig in the garden or do something physical. Mm-hmm. And the other trick is to do more research. And this is what I always told my students. If you're stuck, the best way to get unstuck is to go learn more. Give yourself more information to feed into what's going on up here. So it's kind of amazing how that works for me. I can't say that it worked for all students, but it does work for me. That stuckness is a condition that you can get around.
Very good. Do you feel like your faith or life outlook affects or informs your writing?
I'm sure it does. I'm sure it does. I'm sure that's why I was drawn to this material. And part of what intrigued me about the Civil War is that I discovered you really could not separate the fighting from religious beliefs. Mm. And part of my struggle in writing was, well, am I really going to bring all this religion in? And I found I could not get rid of it. And partly that's because both sides, both the North and the South, believed God was on their side. That's partly why they kept fighting so long. That God must will all these deaths, and we just have to keep fighting till God's will is accomplished. Now that kind of disintegrated, but it was definitely true. And so when I saw a couple of nonfiction writers understanding this link, there's a book called America Aflame by David Goldfield. Mm-hmm. It's excellent at bringing these two together and showing how religion was really I don't know if I'd say it was a motivating factor, but it was definitely a factor in the war, even though, I mean, awful things happened during the war. It's not that people fought kindly at all.
Mhm.
It was very vicious in many ways. So you asked if my ethics and religious beliefs play a part. Absolutely. Um, I I believe it's not right for me to take the life of another person. So of course that affected how I viewed these characters. And that's why it was important for me to always develop some scene where a character was relating with a neighbor or someone in the office, someone who had a different perspective, so that I could show what the South believed, not just my Northern biases. That there was always an attempt to try to see from the other side also. Yeah.
Yeah, good. Um, when did you start writing, and what led that writing into trying to publish your works?
I would say that most of my life I was a dabbler in writing.
Mhm.
I like to write. In fifth grade, I wrote a story where I was the hero in a basketball game. um, but it wasn't until I was in midlife that I started to say, I am a writer. And that was a huge step for me because that pushed me to want to go back to grad school and learn more about the craft and the art of writing, not just kind of like writing. So that's, uh, yeah, my first book was published in 2003, but I had been working on that, I think, already back in the late 80s, and I really needed help with it. I needed to get some professional advice to just kind of throw myself into an environment where everybody talked about books and everybody read books and everybody loved how literature shapes our thinking in many ways. So, yeah. Did I answer that question? I'm not sure.
Yeah, so my next question would be, is when you decided you needed some help reworking your writing and making it better, where did you turn? Like, who are those people that?
Oh, okay. Well, in terms of an institution, I went to graduate school at Ohio University in Athens. And so their teachers, professors, other students, even though they were 20 years younger than I. And now living here in Wisconsin, initially I was part of a writing group, and that was very important to me in terms of finding people who could critique my work and I could accept it from them because I knew that they wanted the best for me and the best for my work. I've gone to workshops like the Glen workshop in New Mexico. I went there one summer for a week. I've gone to the Writers Institute in Madison, and that was primarily to learn about the business of writing, because I had much to learn about that aspect of it. And now I have a friend, a former colleague, who is willing to read my revisions, is willing to say how she took a particular scene, what she felt was missing, what she appreciated. And that's just so invaluable to get that feedback. And I have other people who help me with, excuse me, with say the titles of my books, or how to create an ad, what wording to use. So friends, wow, yeah. Yeah.
If you were to give advice to a younger writer who is wanting to start publishing work, what would it be?
Well, read a lot, read a variety, read things you don't particularly like. Surround yourself with other people who like to read and write. Push yourself to try different modes of writing. Be patient with yourself. For most of us, things don't come and we struggle and we have to revise, and that's part of it. Believe in yourself. Don't get sucked into, oh, I really like this book, I want to write like her. Keep your own, I guess, vision, your own sense of who you are and how you want to write. And the problem there is it may not be popular. It may not be the in thing right at the time. So be patient. Don't throw anything away.
Are there authors or books that have inspired you over the years as you have honed your own craft?
Well, one of the pleasures of going back to grad school in midlife is that the curriculum was full of a whole new set of books, and there were female writers included in the books. And I came to love George Eliot, especially Middlemarch. So I tend to like big old baggy monsters, which is what Henry James called these eternal books. So the Bronte sisters, moving into Virginia Woolf, and then more recently, someone like Mary Gordon. Sue Monk Kidd has a book called The Invention of Wings, which is about Quaker women during the Civil War. Another book that inspired me was, and I didn't read this in school, but since then, Denise Giardina has a book called Saints and Villains, and it's about Dietrich Bonhoeffer and how his religious views came up against the authorities in World War II. That was a tremendous book for me to find, and to see how she managed that war and religion problem.
Yeah. All right, so of this trilogy, Scruples on the Line, we now have book 2 out. Is there anything, without of course giving it away, that we can expect from either book 2 or book 3, which is not out? Can you share anything with us?
Well, the title of book 2 is Loyalties. And I chose that word because during this time frame of spring of 1862 until through January of 1864, people really had to make choices. So David in the Shenandoah Valley had to decide if he was going to shelter slaves coming through, deserters coming through. Did that fit with his religious framework? Esther in the Shenandoah Valley, the 40-some-year-old woman, her sons had to decide, were they going to flee? Were they going to join the Southern Army? And we see some of both. So the basic choices for people, for men, with drafts that were enforced, they could hide in the mountains or in the cellar. They could flee, try to get north. They could buy a substitute, which I had known nothing about. In other words, you pay money to someone else to go fight in your place. Now, talk about a big ball of complication for Anabaptist people. And yet that was their practice, both in Europe and during the Revolutionary War. So, loyalties, government, religious belief. So there are three main battles that take place in Book 2, and they kind of form the backdrop. There's Antietam, Vicksburg, and Gettysburg. And those are the driving forces that create the necessity for these characters to make choices. Is the young man in Chicago going to join the Northern Army? All of his friends have, and he's stayed aloof. He has a love interest back in Eastern Pennsylvania, his best girl. So that's something that gets developed in Book 2. Book 3, well, that goes until shortly after Abraham Lincoln's death, so mid-1865. So the main conflicts, the most graphic conflicts, are going to be what happens in the Shenandoah Valley with, as I said, Sheridan coming through as part of General Grant's campaign. So, yeah, that is going to create the situation where characters are devastated in a number of ways. And the challenge for me was to show both the devastation and to see that somehow these people kept on, that they did not let all of those awful things, they did not decide to give up, that they did what they had to do, and they found other people of like mind to band together with. So how's that for?
Yeah, no, it gives us a little bit to look forward to.
Okay.
I'm excited.
Yeah.
My final question for you is, if there was just one thing, what do you hope readers take away from your stories?
Well, I think what I just said about not giving up is very relevant for a reader, to understand that people have gone through awful things before and survived, some of them. I think the reality of how, while this is not a book about race, there is always the aspect of race in this book. And so when I think about readers today, I would hope that they would see all of the parallels from Civil War times up to and through what we're going through now. They didn't have a pandemic, but they have a lot of turmoil and uncertainty. So surviving, making it through, I think that's a big, to me, it's an inspiration. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Evie, so much for your time. I think these books sound amazing, and I can't wait to read all three of them. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's great to talk with you. Yeah. And let me know what you think of my books.
I will.